June 3, 1944, 0600 hours, Divisional Headquarters, 352nd Infantry Division, Normandy coast. Oberst Ernst Goth stares at the supply requisition form in his hands, and the mathematics no longer work. His division requires 300 tons of supplies daily to maintain combat readiness. The actual deliveries logged in his quartermaster's ledger tell a different story. May 28th, 187 tons. May 29th, 142 tons. May 30th, 96 tons. June 1st, 53 tons. The trend accelerates downward like water spiraling into a drain. His artillery batteries have ammunition for 3 days of sustained fire. His trucks sit immobile, their fuel tanks containing enough gasoline for perhaps 50 kilometers. In the mess halls, soldiers receive 1,500 calories daily, barely enough to maintain body weight, nowhere near the 2,500 required for combat operations. Goth served on the Eastern Front, where Soviet attacks could be countered with movement, with maneuver, with the legendary German capacity for rapid redeployment. But movement requires fuel. Counterattack requires ammunition. Sustained defense requires food. The Atlantic Wall, that magnificent propaganda achievement of concrete and steel stretching 2,400 miles from Norway to Spain, faces invasion by the most powerful amphibious force ever assembled. And it starves. 3 years earlier, German logistics officers calculated that defending the coast of France would be straightforward. The French rail network, among Europe's finest, could move divisions rapidly to any threatened sector. Supply depots established throughout the interior would feed the coastal defenders. The mathematics seemed simple. A standard infantry division required approximately 100 tons of supplies daily when inactive, rising to 300 tons during heavy combat operations. The rail system could deliver thousands of tons daily. The problem appeared solved before it existed. But those calculations were made before the Allies systematically destroyed every major rail junction, bridge, and marshalling yard in northern France. The transportation plan, conceived by Air Marshal Arthur Tedder and Professor Solly Zuckerman, represented industrial warfare applied to infrastructure. Between March and June 1944, Allied bombers flew tens of thousands of sorties against French railways. The targets were chosen with mathematical precision. Not random destruction, but surgical severing of arteries. Every bridge over the Seine, north of Paris. Every major rail junction within 200 miles of Normandy. Every locomotive repair facility. Every marshalling yard where trains could be organized and dispatched. The German Air Ministry report of June 13th, 1944, states what Goth already knows from watching empty supply trains fail to arrive. The raids have caused the breakdown of all main lines. The coast defences have been cut off from the supply bases in the interior, producing a situation which threatens to have serious consequences. Large-scale strategic movement of German troops by rail is practically impossible at the present time, and must remain so while attacks are maintained at their present intensity. The report uses the careful language of military bureaucracy, but its meaning is clear. The Atlantic Wall defenders cannot be supplied. They cannot be reinforced. They cannot maneuver. They can only wait in their positions and hope that when invasion comes, they possess enough ammunition, fuel, and food to survive the first 24 hours. Because after that, no help is coming. The destruction began systematically in March. The RAF Bomber Command attacked Trappes, a major rail hub serving western France, on the night of March 6th. 273 Lancaster bombers delivered 1,524 tons of bombs. The Sotteville rail yards at Rouen, critical for north-south rail traffic, were struck repeatedly through April and May. By early June, 3/4 of the French railway network lay in ruins. Allied intelligence estimated that 1,500 locomotives had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The Germans captured France in 1940, partly by using the excellent French rail system to supply their advancing armies. 4 years later, those same railways could no longer support defensive operations. The statistics tell the story of systematic strangulation. In January 1944, French railways moved approximately 24,000 freight trains weekly. By May, that number had collapsed to 6,000. The tonnage available for German military supply dropped proportionally. Between May 19th and June 6th, railway usage decreased by 60%. The Germans could move supplies by truck, but truck transport consumed the very fuel those trucks were meant to deliver. Each ton of supplies moved 100 miles by truck required approximately 2 gallons of gasoline simply for the transport. The Germans in France lacked both the trucks and the fuel for sustained motor transport on the scale required. General Lieutenant Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army defending Normandy, watches his supply situation deteriorate throughout May. His army consists of 14 divisions spread along hundreds of miles of coastline. Combined, they require approximately 4,200 tons of supplies daily just to maintain minimum combat readiness. His quartermaster reports actual deliveries averaging 800 tons daily by late May. The deficit grows like compound interest. Ammunition that fires cannot be replaced. Fuel that burns cannot be replenished. Food that soldiers eat leaves warehouses empty. The 352nd Infantry Division, positioned along what the Allies will codename Omaha Beach, illustrates the crisis in granular detail. The division possesses excellent defensive positions. Machine gun nests in concrete bunkers overlook the beaches. Artillery positions on the bluffs can deliver devastating fire on any landing attempt. Minefields protect the approaches. 3 years of preparation have created formidable defences. But defensive positions cannot fire without ammunition. Soldiers cannot fight without food. And the division's supply situation deteriorates daily. A German infantry division in 1944 contains approximately 17,000 men. The official daily ration, Verpflegungssatz the FOT, provides 2,500 to 2,800 calories for combat troops. This includes 700 grams of bread, 136 grams of meat, 200 grams of potatoes, plus fats, vegetables, and coffee. The ration assumes regular supply deliveries from interior depots through functioning rail networks. By early June 1944, divisions on the Atlantic coast receive approximately 60% of regulation rations. Soldiers eat 1,500 to 1,700 calories daily. Not starvation, but malnutrition. Energy levels drop. Physical performance declines. The capacity to sustain combat operations diminishes with every missed meal. The ammunition situation proves equally dire. Each artillery battery requires approximately 300 rounds daily during sustained operations. The 352nd Division's artillery regiment possesses 4 batteries, 1,200 rounds per day when fighting. By June 1st, available ammunition storage contains enough for 3 days of combat. After that, the guns fall silent. Infantry ammunition presents similar mathematics. Each rifleman carries 60 rounds. Sustained firefight consumes that in perhaps 15 minutes. Machine gun positions require thousands of rounds. The MG-42, Germany's standard machine gun, fires 1,200 rounds per minute. A single position defending against sustained assault could exhaust a day's supply allocation in minutes. But perhaps the most critical shortage is fuel. German doctrine emphasizes mobile defense. When the enemy attacks, reserves counterattack to throw them back into the sea. Rommel demands this strategy. He knows that once the Allies establish a beachhead, their industrial superiority becomes overwhelming. The invasion must be defeated on the beaches, in the first hours, before Allied reinforcements arrive. This requires mobile reserves positioned inland, ready to move rapidly to the threatened sector. Mobile reserves require fuel. The 21st Panzer Division, Germany's only armoured division, close to the Normandy beaches, illustrates the problem. The division possesses 146 tanks and armoured vehicles. Each Panzer IV tank carries 470 litres of fuel, providing approximately 210 kilometers range on roads, 85 kilometers cross-country. From the division's position near Caen to the beaches requires 15 kilometers. Simple enough. But a counterattack is not a simple drive. It requires maneuvering into position, coordinating with infantry, responding to enemy fire, repositioning after attacks. Actual fuel consumption during combat operations reaches 3 to 4 times peacetime calculations. The division requires approximately 50,000 litres of fuel for a single day of combat operations. By June 5th, available fuel supplies total enough for perhaps 4 days of operations, assuming no resupply. General Hans von Salmuth, commanding the 15th Army north of the Seine, submits reports to Field Marshal von Rundstedt throughout May, documenting the supply crisis. His divisions report fuel shortages preventing training exercises, ammunition shortages requiring rationing during practice firing, food supplies insufficient for maintaining soldier strength. He requests increased allocations. Von Rundstedt forwards these requests to Berlin. The response comes in carefully worded Wehrmacht bureaucraties. Transportation difficulties prevent increased allocations at this time. Make do with existing supplies. Expect improvement when rail repairs complete. But the repairs never complete because the bombing never stops. American B-17 attack by day with precision bombing. RAF Lancasters attack by night with saturation bombing. Every repaired bridge gets struck again within days. Every rebuilt rail yard becomes a target. German engineers work frantically to restore service. But restoration cannot keep pace with destruction. The mathematics are inexorable. The Allies can bomb faster than Germans can repair. French resistance compounds the problem. Organized by the Special Operations Executive and supplied by Allied airdrops, resistance cells sabotage what Allied bombers miss. Telephone cables cut. Rail switches destroyed. Small bridges demolished. Fuel depots burned. German supply officers face an enemy they cannot fight because that enemy blends into the civilian population. A rail supervisor who approves shipments by day might be the resistance cell leader directing sabotage by night. The Germans execute suspected saboteurs, but the resistance continues. The supply situation continues deteriorating. By late May, German soldiers on the Atlantic Wall understand their situation without needing official explanations. The bread is darker, coarser, contains more sawdust filler. The meat ration shrinks. Coffee becomes ersatz brewed from roasted acorns. Soldiers supplementing rations by purchasing from local French civilians, by foraging in fields, by any means available. Officers look the other way, because the alternative is watching their men weaken from hunger. Gefreiter Klaus Richter, a machine gunner in the 352nd Division, writes to his family in Bavaria on May 28, 1944. We eat less now than during training. The officers say supplies will improve soon, but we hear the bombers every night flying over to attack the railways. How can supplies arrive when the Allies bomb everything that moves? His letter, intercepted by Allied intelligence after the war, reflects what German military records confirm. The coastal defenders know they fight a defensive battle with dwindling resources against an enemy with unlimited supplies. The German intelligence assessment of Allied capabilities adds psychological weight to the physical deprivation. Reports from agents, from reconnaissance, from intercepted communications paint a picture of overwhelming Allied strength. Thousands of ships assembled in British ports, thousands of aircraft stationed at British airfields, millions of tons of supplies stockpiled for the invasion. The contrast with German scarcity becomes inescapable. Allied soldiers will land with full ammunition loads, full fuel tanks, full stomachs. German defenders will fight with partial ammunition, limited fuel, empty bellies. The Luftwaffe's absence makes the supply crisis worse. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe in Western Europe possesses approximately 500 operational aircraft. The Allies have over 12,000. German fighters cannot protect supply convoys. Allied fighters roam freely, strafing anything that moves on French roads. Truck convoys attempting to deliver supplies to the coast face devastating air attacks. Drivers learn to move only at night, with no lights, hoping to escape notice. Even then, Allied night fighters equipped with radar hunt them. Supply deliveries that should take hours require days. Losses mount. What arrives is less than what departed. The situation in Normandy reflects broader German logistical collapse. On the Eastern Front, Soviet offensives consume supplies faster than German industry can produce them. In Italy, Allied advances require diverting resources from France. German synthetic fuel production, targeted by Allied bombing, cannot meet military requirements. The Wehrmacht in 1944 fights simultaneously on 3 fronts, while Allied bombing destroys German industrial capacity. The Atlantic Wall defenders receive what's left after more urgent requirements are met, and what's left is insufficient. Rommel understands the mathematics. He tours the coastal defences throughout May, inspecting positions, talking to soldiers, reviewing supply reports. His diary entries reflect growing frustration. The men are willing, the positions are strong, but we lack the supplies to fight. Every request I submit disappears into Berlin's bureaucracy. They speak of difficulties, of competing priorities, of improvements coming soon. But the invasion comes sooner. His inspection reports to von Rundstedt detail the specific shortages. The 716th Infantry Division lacks sufficient ammunition for sustained defence. The 352nd Division requires 40,000 additional mines to complete beach obstacles. The 711th Division reports fuel shortages preventing training manoeuvres. Each report requests immediate action. Each response promises eventual improvement. The contrast with Allied preparations is stark. Eisenhower's forces accumulate supplies in southern England at rates that would overwhelm German logistics comprehension. The Allied build-up for D-Day includes 7 million tons of supplies, 450,000 tons of ammunition, 1 million tons of fuel. The supplies arrive by ship, by truck, by train. They accumulate in warehouses, in depots, in fields converted to storage. The Allies plan to land 150,000 men on D-Day and sustain them with continuous supply flows. The Germans defending know that their supply lines are already broken before the first Allied soldier lands. The food situation becomes critical in early June. The 352nd Division's quartermaster reports on June 3rd that ration deliveries have fallen to 53 tons daily, less than 1/5 of requirements. He implements emergency measures, reduce bread rations by 20%, eliminate meat rations except every 3rd day, substitute dehydrated vegetables for fresh, supplement official rations by requisitioning from French civilians. These measures buy time, perhaps a week, perhaps 2, but sustained combat operations require sustained supply. And the supply line is broken. What the German defenders don't fully understand is that their starvation is intentional. Allied planners specifically designed the transportation plan to prevent German reinforcement and supply. Tedder and Eisenhower calculated that preventing German movement was more valuable than bombing German industry. A tank in a factory in Germany poses no threat to the invasion. A tank at the Normandy beach becomes an immediate problem. But a tank without fuel remains immobile, a steel box. The transportation plan aims not just to destroy railways, but to create a logistical desert where German forces cannot sustain combat operations. The German response attempts to compensate through local supply. Units are instructed to establish relationships with local farmers, to purchase or requisition food directly, to supplement official rations through foraging. This works to some extent for food, though French civilians have limited surplus to share. But it cannot solve the ammunition and fuel problems. Those require industrial production and long-distance transportation. A farmer can provide potatoes, but not 88mm artillery shells. Local requisition obtains bread, but not aviation gasoline. The 352nd Division's experience with local supply illustrates both possibilities and limitations. The division quartermaster establishes purchasing agreements with local bakeries. French bread supplements German military rations. Farmers sell potatoes, vegetables, occasionally meat. Soldiers work in fields helping with planting, creating goodwill that translates to food access. By these measures, the division maintains basic nutrition despite official supply shortfalls. But when the invasion begins, local supply becomes irrelevant. French civilians cannot supply ammunition. They cannot provide fuel. They cannot replace losses. The division fights with what it possesses on June 6th, knowing no resupply will come. The German divisions defending the Atlantic Wall face a fundamental military problem. Static defense requires less supply than mobile warfare. A soldier in a bunker fires less ammunition than a soldier in assault. But static defense surrenders initiative. The defender waits for the attacker to choose time and place, and Rommel knows that purely static defense dooms the Atlantic Wall. The Allies possess overwhelming naval gunfire, overwhelming air power, overwhelming numbers. They will eventually breach any static defense. Victory requires mobile counterattack, throwing the invaders back into the sea before they consolidate. But mobile counterattack requires fuel, ammunition, and fresh troops, all of which require functioning supply lines. And the supply lines are broken. General Oberst Friedrich Dollmann, commanding the 7th Army, hosts a meeting of division commanders on June 4th. The agenda includes reviewing readiness for the expected invasion. Each commander reports his division's status. The 352nd Division reports 50% of required ammunition stocks, 60% of required fuel, 65% of required rations. The 716th Division reports similar shortages. The 711th Division commander states bluntly that his division cannot sustain combat operations for more than 48 hours without resupply. Dollmann listens to these reports with increasing frustration. He cannot magically produce supplies that don't exist. He cannot repair railways while Allied bombers continue attacking. He can only prepare to fight with what his divisions possess. What makes the supply situation psychologically devastating is that the Germans know they face an enemy with unlimited resources. Reconnaissance reports describe the Allied build-up in England. Intelligence estimates calculate Allied supply stockpiles. German officers understand that while their soldiers go hungry, Allied soldiers eat well. While German tanks sit immobile for lack of fuel, Allied tanks will have full tanks. While German artillery rations ammunition, Allied artillery will fire unlimited rounds. The material imbalance demoralizes before the first shot is fired. The Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe face even worse supply situations than the Army. The Kriegsmarine possesses approximately 35 operational submarines in Atlantic bases, plus a handful of destroyers and torpedo boats. These vessels require fuel, torpedoes, ammunition. Naval supply lines suffer the same railway disruption as Army supply. Submarine operations from Brest and other Atlantic ports decrease through May as fuel and torpedo supplies dwindle. The Luftwaffe's 500 operational aircraft require aviation fuel, bombs, ammunition for machine guns. Aviation fuel production, targeted by Allied bombing, cannot meet demand. Luftflotte Drey, responsible for Western Europe, receives approximately 30% of requested fuel allocations. Aircraft sit grounded on airfields, not from lack of pilots, but from lack of fuel. The cumulative effect creates a defensive force that exists more on paper than in reality. Hitler's Atlantic Wall appears formidable in propaganda photographs. Concrete bunkers, steel obstacles, minefields. But military effectiveness depends not just on positions, but on the capacity to fight. And fighting requires supplies. By June 5, 1944, the Atlantic Wall defenders possess strong positions but weak logistics. They can fire for a few hours, maneuver for limited distances, fight for perhaps 2 days. After that, they become increasingly helpless. The German military tradition emphasizes leadership, training, tactical excellence. The Wehrmacht believes that superior troops can overcome material disadvantages. This belief was validated by early war victories, where German forces defeated larger but poorly led opponents. But Normandy in 1944 presents a different situation. The Allies are well led, well trained, and possess overwhelming material superiority. German tactical excellence cannot overcome a 10-to-1 material disadvantage. And that disadvantage begins with the supply situation before the invasion starts. The night of June 5th to 6th, as Allied forces prepare to launch the invasion, German defenders along the Normandy coast settle into their positions, unaware that dawn will bring the largest amphibious assault in history. But even if they knew, even if they had perfect intelligence of Allied plans, their response capacity is limited by their supply situation. The divisions defending Omaha Beach possess enough ammunition for approximately 6 hours of sustained combat. Enough fuel to move reserves perhaps 30 kilometers. Enough food for 3 days. When the invasion begins, they fight with courage and determination. But courage and determination cannot replace ammunition that doesn't exist. The transportation plan's effects reveal themselves immediately. When German commanders attempt to move reserves to the invasion beaches on June 6th, they discover that movement is nearly impossible. The 12th SS Panzer Division, positioned south of the invasion area, requires 18 hours to move 70 miles to the battle. Pre-war planning calculated that movement should take 4 hours. Allied air attacks delay the division. Fuel shortages require stops to refuel. Damaged roads slow movement. What should be rapid reinforcement becomes a grinding advance that arrives too late. The 352nd Division defending Omaha Beach fights with desperate courage. Machine gunners fire until their barrels glow red. Artillery batteries engage targets until ammunition exhausts. Infantry holds positions against overwhelming naval gunfire. By nightfall, the division has suffered approximately 20% casualties. More critically, ammunition stocks are exhausted. Fuel reserves are depleted. Food supplies are nearly gone. The division still holds some positions, but its capacity to continue fighting diminishes with every hour. Requests for resupply go unanswered because there is nothing to send. The railways are still destroyed. The supply depots are still depleted. The logistical situation that starved the division before invasion continues after invasion. German prisoners captured on D-Day provide testimony that confirms the supply crisis. Interrogations reveal that many soldiers have not received full rations for weeks, that artillery positions rationed ammunition even before the invasion, that fuel shortages prevented training exercises. Allied intelligence officers compiling these reports recognized that the transportation plan succeeded beyond hopes. The German defenders were not just outfought, they were outsupplied before fighting began. The broader strategic consequences unfold over subsequent weeks. German divisions attempting to reinforce Normandy discover that movement remains nearly impossible. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, ordered from southern France to Normandy, requires 18 days to travel a distance that should take 3. Allied air attacks destroy convoys. Fuel shortages strand vehicles. The division arrives piecemeal, battered, having lost hundreds of vehicles and thousands of men before engaging the enemy. Similar problems affect every reinforcement attempt. The Atlantic Wall defenders receive minimal help because the transportation network cannot deliver it. The contrast with Allied logistics becomes increasingly evident. American forces establish the Red Ball Express, an emergency truck convoy system that delivers thousands of tons of supplies daily to advancing armies. The Allies repair the bombed French railways, establishing supply lines that eventually carry more tonnage than the Germans ever moved. The Mulberry artificial harbours enable supply delivery directly from England. While German forces struggle with insufficient supplies, Allied forces possess such abundance that waste becomes routine. The material imbalance is not just significant, it's overwhelming. German commanders attempting to analyze the defeat face uncomfortable conclusions. Tactical excellence proved insufficient against material superiority. Defensive positions proved inadequate against unlimited ammunition and naval gunfire. Courage proved meaningless when soldiers lacked the supplies to fight. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, in post-war interrogation, states simply that the transportation plan made German mobile defense impossible. We could not move reserves because we lacked fuel. We could not sustain defense because we lacked ammunition. We could not feed our soldiers adequately. The war was lost before the invasion began, lost in the railways and supply depots. The Atlantic Wall's starvation represents a new type of warfare, not defeat through battle, but defeat through logistics. The Allies never attacked German supply depots in France. They didn't need to. By destroying the transportation network, they made those depots irrelevant. Thousands of tons of supplies sat in warehouses in southern France, useless because they could not reach the soldiers who needed them. The Wehrmacht discovered that in modern warfare, supplies at a depot 500 miles away might as well not exist. What matters is what reaches the front line. And increasingly, nothing reached the front line. The mathematical reality proves as decisive as any battle. German divisions required 300 tons of supplies daily. They received 50 tons. The deficit compounds daily. After a week, the accumulated shortfall reaches over 1,700 tons per division. After 2 weeks, over 3,500 tons. These are not abstract numbers. They represent ammunition not fired, fuel not burned, food not eaten. They represent military capability that evaporates like water in desert heat. The Atlantic Wall didn't fall because Allied soldiers were braver or better trained. It fell because German soldiers fought without adequate supplies, while Allied soldiers possessed unlimited resources. The human cost of the supply crisis becomes evident in accounts from German soldiers. Gefreiter Heinz Müller, captured on June 7th, tells his interrogators that his unit had not received meat rations for 10 days before the invasion. That ammunition was rationed during training, limiting practice firing. That officers told them to conserve supplies because resupply was uncertain. His testimony, multiplied across thousands of prisoners, confirms that the German defenders knew they faced overwhelming odds with inadequate support. The irony is that the Atlantic Wall's concrete and steel remained largely intact. The bunkers Rommel had strengthened, the obstacles he had emplaced, the defensive positions carefully prepared over 3 years still existed. What disappeared was the capacity to use them effectively. A machine gun nest without ammunition becomes a concrete tomb. An artillery position without shells becomes an expensive decoration. A defensive position without food becomes indefensible as soldiers weaken from hunger. The physical infrastructure survived, but the logistical infrastructure collapsed. The transportation plan cost the Allies approximately 76,000 tons of bombs, thousands of aircraft sorties, and significant air crew casualties. It also cost French civilian lives, estimated at 12,000 to 15,000 killed in the bombing campaign. These were known costs, accepted by Allied planners who calculated that preventing German reinforcement justified the price. The results validated the strategy. German mobile reserves that might have defeated the invasion remained unable to reach the beaches. German defenders fought with courage but inadequate supplies. The invasion succeeded partly because Allied planners understood that destroying transportation infrastructure was more valuable than destroying enemy forces directly. The legacy of the Atlantic Wall's starvation extends beyond World War II. Modern military doctrine recognizes that logistics is strategy. The capacity to supply forces determines what operations are possible. The most capable army becomes ineffective when supplies cannot reach it. The German experience in Normandy taught generations of military planners that protecting supply lines is as important as winning battles. An unsupplied army cannot fight, regardless of training, leadership, or courage. Rommel's final assessment, recorded before his forced suicide in October 1944, acknowledged the fundamental problem. The Atlantic Wall was strong enough. The soldiers were capable, but we could not supply them. The Allies understood that destroying our railways was more effective than attacking our positions. They defeated us through logistics before defeating us through battle. This admission from one of Germany's finest commanders captures the essential truth. The Atlantic Wall was starving before D-Day, and starving armies cannot win wars. By June 10, 1944, the German defensive line in Normandy stabilizes temporarily, but the supply situation continues deteriorating. Allied air supremacy prevents daylight movement. Fuel shortages immobilize tanks. Ammunition shortages limit artillery fire. Food shortages weaken soldiers. The Wehrmacht in Normandy fights a defensive battle while slowly starving. Units withdraw not because they are defeated in combat, but because they lack supplies to continue fighting. Position after position is abandoned not to enemy assault, but to supply exhaustion. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. A German infantry division requires 300 tons of supplies daily. By mid-June, divisions in Normandy receive approximately 40 tons daily. The shortfall of 260 tons per division per day compounds continuously. After 30 days, each division operates with a cumulative deficit of 7,800 tons. This represents missing ammunition, missing fuel, missing food. It represents soldiers fighting at perhaps 25% capability because they lack the material resources for sustained combat. The mathematics of logistics become the mathematics of defeat. The German soldiers defending Normandy fought with courage that their enemies acknowledged. American veterans of Omaha Beach testified to the ferocity of German defensive fire. British forces attacking Caen faced determined German resistance for 6 weeks. But courage and determination require support. They require ammunition to sustain fire. They require fuel for movement. They require food for energy. When those supplies diminish, combat effectiveness diminishes proportionally. The German defenders of Normandy proved that even the most determined soldiers cannot fight effectively when logistical support collapses. The transportation plan's success established a template for modern warfare. Destroy the enemy's capacity to supply his forces, and you defeat him regardless of tactical outcomes. This lesson was applied in subsequent conflicts. In the Gulf War, Allied forces targeted Iraqi supply lines before attacking Iraqi forces. In Afghanistan and Iraq, logistics became primary targets. The principle established in Normandy remains valid. An army separated from its supplies is an army doomed to defeat. The Atlantic Wall today stands as physical memorial to the futility of static defense without logistics. Bunkers remain on the Normandy beaches, concrete testaments to German engineering. Tourists visit these positions, imagining the battle that occurred. But the real battle was fought in railway yards and marshalling centres across France. The real defeat happened in supply depots and fuel warehouses. The Atlantic Wall fell not because it was weak, but because it was starving. The soldiers manning those concrete positions fought as well as soldiers can fight, but they fought with empty stomachs, low ammunition, and nearly empty fuel tanks against an enemy with unlimited supplies. The mathematical reality of modern warfare became inescapable. Tactical excellence cannot overcome a 5-to-1 supply disadvantage. Defensive positions cannot withstand unlimited naval gunfire. Static defense cannot defeat mobile offense when the defender lacks fuel for movement. The Atlantic Wall demonstrated these truths at terrible cost. It proved that in industrial warfare, logistics is not support for strategy. Logistics is strategy. The force that maintains supply lines wins. The force whose supply lines are severed loses. This lesson, written in concrete bunkers and destroyed railways across Normandy, remains the fundamental truth of modern military operations. The German soldiers who defended Normandy deserve recognition not for their cause, which was unjust, but for their perseverance in impossible circumstances. They fought courageously while hungry, while short of ammunition, while knowing that relief would not come. They held positions that should have been abandoned, fought battles that could not be won, endured privations that should have broken their will. Their defeat was inevitable, decided by logistical mathematics before the first Allied soldier landed. But they fought anyway, because soldiers fight. And they starved anyway, because broken railways cannot deliver food. The Atlantic Wall was starving before D-Day. This simple fact, more than any tactical analysis or strategic assessment, explains why the invasion succeeded. German defenders possessed excellent positions, capable soldiers, and determination to resist. But they lacked adequate supplies. And in modern warfare, supplies matter more than courage. The force that eats fights better than the force that starves. The force with full ammunition fights longer than the force rationing shots. The force with fuel can maneuver, while the force without fuel remains static. The Allies understood these principles and acted on them. The transportation plan starved the Atlantic Wall, and starving armies cannot win wars.